Welcome back to the Artie Lange Show. And my first guest, interesting guy. His name is Scott Freiman, and he's a guy who is a huge fan of the Beatles and tours the country, I guess. He toured colleges?
U.S. and Canada.
U.S. and Canada, giving lectures about the Beatles, taking them very seriously. And a lot of people might, you know, poo-poo this as being, you know, they're a rock band. Calm down, you know. You're going a little too overboard with them. But I happen to be. But I'm a romantic. I'm a romantic when it comes to classic rock, particularly the Beatles and the Stones. And I love the Who too, but I don't think they have quite the aura that the Beatles and the Stones have. And so I'm happy to talk to you, Scott Freiman. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great. Thanks for letting me on the show today.
Okay, so give me how this started. How did this start?
So I'm a composer, producer. I have a studio, and you know, musicians these days tend to hang out in front of their laptops, in front of their computers.
Right.
I thought it would be fun to get a bunch of guys over, and women as well, and just have a party and listen to some music. And I thought I should probably do something a little more. So I took Sgt. Pepper, and I grabbed a bunch of very rare tracks that I had and put a little presentation together for these guys. And they said, "Where else are you doing this?" And I said, "It's just for you." And they said, "No, no, no. You got to call some of these people." So I did a lecture at City College. Someone knew someone there.
Right.
I did a lecture out at in Huntington at Cinema Arts, so one of my favorite places to be, and they love me out there, and they love the show. And
so you use music from Sgt. Pepper's and other albums?
So now it's really spread.
Within the lecture, you use the music as well.
That's right, but I only play rare tracks, and what I'm really focused on is a lot less of the, you know, who was sleeping with whom and what drugs were they taking, and really what, how they created the music, how they worked in the studio, what the technical innovations were. They were very innovative as composers. Their lyrics were innovative. So I talk about that. And I take people who've never been in a studio before, and I make them feel what it's like to be in a studio with the Beatles. And it's a lot of fun. Now,
when you say a rare, give me your opinion about what is a rare track.
So a rare track is an outtake, an early take of a song, a demo recording. I take some of the recordings and I'm able to manipulate them to isolate certain tracks so we can hear just Paul McCartney's bass or just the solo vocals. That's really very, very cool. And then I play some related tracks sometimes. You know, I'll illustrate with a Beach Boys track what the Beatles used as inspiration and things of that sort.
I'll give you what's so fascinating to me about the Beatles. Okay, first of all, they went from a top 40 pop band.
Love Me Do.
As pop as you could be, where like teenage girls, like John said before, like running after them. And then became, you know, once the 60s really hit, they transformed. They could have easily disappeared.
That's
they
right.
They could have been looked at as kind of a joke, or like they were just a teeny bopper thing. They grew their hair long, started experimenting with drugs and everything else. And they were such brilliant artists that the Stones did the same thing to me. Like they started out young, and fame touched their lives, and wealth, and everything that goes with that.
Right.
And their later music, their later albums became how they were affected by that.
That's right.
And they gave you great life lessons in those songs, those later songs. And particularly, you know, what was it, 13 albums in 7 years they did?
That's right.
And the last 4 or 5 are just, to me, just like life lessons on dealing with women, dealing with drugs, dealing with whatever, you know, and losing friendships and everything. And combined with brilliant music, they also made the decision not to tour anymore.
That's right.
And just to go into the studio and really just see how they could use every aspect of studio recording and not have to worry about recreating it live. Like the quintessential song is A Day in the Life, they probably point to, because it's half Paul, half John, singing and writing. And there's bands now. There was a band that came on Howard all the time. I forget their name, but some of the guys from the Letterman band, they would recreate Fab Four, yeah. Treat it like classical music. They would recreate it like Beethoven's symphony, and the Stones did the same thing. But they kept touring. But their music became so deep and so smart in a way, combined with great music and lyrics, that they became one of the most unique things ever in music. That's what they are to me. And plus, they were the soundtrack of my life growing up. I was born in '67. My parents loved them. And, you know, I mean, so what is the gist? Is that the gist of what you're talking about?
So, absolutely, yes. I mean, the Beatles were, as you said, they were a great pop band. They wrote great pop songs. And they could have faded away like a lot of other British invasion bands and a lot of other American bands.
My analogy is always, it's like NSYNC becoming Nirvana.
That's right, exactly. That's a great analogy because they really When they pulled off the road, people don't realize what a big deal that was. There was no such thing as a studio band.
Right.
Right? You went out and you toured. You made your singles, you padded your albums, and you went out and you toured. So the fact that they pulled off the road really made everyone sit up and take notice what is going to happen here. And what they did is they revolutionized the way albums are made.
Right.
There was a lot going on around that time. They were listening to all of it. They were influencing other people, and other people were influencing them. But they really did change so much. And their lyrics, as you said, got so much more advanced, so much more serious,
Just
so much
beautiful,
deep.
right? They wrote
really
they
wonderful.
wrote some of the most beautiful love songs in my life.
Right.
You know, the whole album, Rubber Soul.
Great album.
You know, In My Life, or Norwegian Wood is a perfect example of, like, I think it was John or Paul met a girl,
Lennon.
and Lennon met a girl. And, you know, just wrote this beautiful song about that encounter, about meeting a girl when you're a celebrity, maybe. And, you know, it's just, it's beautiful stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very, very serious. And what was so interesting about the Beatles is the combination of personalities, because
Right.
you had John, who was very sarcastic,
Right.
Very angry.
More cynical.
More cynical.
Yeah.
You had Paul, who was wanted to be nice to everybody in the world, and he wanted to write fluffy pop songs sometimes.
Right.
But sometimes he would write wonderful, beautiful, deep songs as well. You had George coming into his own around that same time period.
Here Comes the Sun and everything.
Oh my gosh, great
something.
song.
The song's something. Like,
Is something and Here Comes the Sun are just
Right.
As good as anything John and Paul wrote.
Definitely.
And that combination, was such a rarity, right?
Right.
And they were all different. They weren't copying each other's styles. They were writing in very different styles. They were collaborating. John would not have been John without Paul, and vice versa. And
now, do you think if John Lennon were alive today, he would admit that? I seem to think Paul is more ready to admit that than John Lennon was.
to admit that they needed each other?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think so. I think John, if you read his interviews, depending on the day that you caught him,
Right.
he could be, dismiss all of his own songs. And the next day, oh, no, I really like this. I think that John would have probably mellowed over time. Of course, we don't know. But it's been interesting to watch Paul. And Paul got a lot of backlash because, with Lennon being killed so suddenly, John became the god, if you will.
Right.
And Paul became the guy who broke up the Beatles, the one who wasn't really talented, and that's completely unfair.
Well, he got Yoko. He took a lot of hits for.
Yeah, well, that's that too as well.
Yeah.
And I think that over time, as it's become clearer what the contributions each person made to the group, you realize how important they were to each other.
Right. Now, whose solo career are you a bigger fan of? Up till John dying. Obviously.
Right. I have to say I am a Paul fan.
Right.
But I love all John's stuff and George's stuff as well. But I think what is so great about Paul and what some people hate about Paul is he changes so much. He brings in different styles. He brings in his 20s music hall stuff.
Right.
He does an opera. He does a ballet, and then he rocks with the Nirvana folks.
Yeah.
This is a guy who's incredibly talented and gifted, and still doesn't read or write music. So
Is that true? Really, I didn't know that.
He really, he tried a couple times, and he uses a computer now a little bit, but for the most part, doesn't read or write music. And what's so great about Paul is that he can write in all these styles. He can go back and forth, and there are some real gems throughout his entire solo career.
Yeah, we got to take a break, but I want to ask you when we come back exactly how long is the lecture for that you give?
So it depends on the lecture.
It,
the one I'm going to be doing in a few weeks in Huntington is 3 hours, 3-hour White Album show. They range from 90 minutes to 2 hours usually.
And you pick one album that you do focus on?
I have a couple shows on albums, Revolver, White Album, Sgt. Pepper. I have one show just on Strawberry Fields Forever.
Right.
And I have a show on the early Beatles, how they became the Beatles from their Quarrymen days in the late 50s to 1963, their first really big album. It's
okay,
fascinating.
I want to ask you a little bit about the one you're going to be doing with the White Album, because when we come back with Scott Freiman on the Artie Lange Show.